Okay, let's unpack this. A really intriguing meeting, potentially quite significant on the world stage,
Mhm.
and happening, well, not where you'd expect these high-level talks,
Exactly. Not in some formal summit setting, but around the events for Pope Francis's funeral in Rome.
which is what we're diving into today, this recent, maybe slightly unexpected meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
Yeah, the whole context is fascinating, isn't it? The sort of solemnity of the occasion for a meeting like this. It really speaks to the urgency, I think.
It does. So our sources for this are mostly news excerpts, looking at reports of the meeting itself and what came out right afterwards.
And our mission, our goal here is to really get into what was said, maybe what wasn't said, and why this matters, especially with the war in Ukraine ongoing and Trump talking about wanting to broker peace.
Right. We want to figure out the key takeaways, the potential ripples, and why you should care about this specific interaction.
So where do we start? The
Yeah.
meeting itself, the descriptions.
Let's start there. The immediate reactions. How was it described?
Well, the White House statement, that called it very productive, which, in diplomatic language, that feels quite positive.
Uh-huh. Productive. And what about the Ukrainian side?
They used the word constructive,
Hmm.
and maybe more revealing, they apparently started working to set up another meeting right away.
Oh, interesting. So they saw value in continuing the conversation quickly.
Seems like it. It suggests they felt something worthwhile came out of that first talk.
And Zelensky himself, he put something out, didn't he?
He did, yeah, on social media. He called it a good meeting and specifically mentioned they discussed a lot one-on-one.
That one-on-one part feels important. Direct talk, no aides, maybe.
Potentially.
Mm-hmm.
It could allow for a more frank exchange, maybe build some personal understanding.
Did he talk about what he hoped would come from it? The outcomes?
Absolutely. He was quite clear. He talked about needing results, specifically protecting lives. That was front and center.
Exactly.
And then a full and unconditional ceasefire. And beyond that, establishing a reliable and lasting peace to stop another war starting up again. The core Ukrainian aims, really.
Unconditional ceasefire, lasting peace, big goals.
Huge goals. And he also described the meeting itself in quite elevated terms. He called it very symbolic.
Symbolic. Symbolic of what, do you think?
Well, it could be symbolic of perhaps a renewed diplomatic push, or maybe just the significance of a former U.S. president engaging directly like this. Hard to say for sure.
And he didn't stop there, did he?
No, he added, it had the potential to become historic if, and this is the key part, if they achieve joint results.
Historic. That's setting the bar high. It suggests he sees a real opportunity or maybe hopes to create one.
It definitely raises the stakes, or at least frames it that way. And we even saw pictures, right?
Yeah, Ukraine released photos, one of Trump and Zelensky meeting.
And another one that showed them in a wider group with Macron, the French president, and Keir Starmer from the UK.
Right, the new prime minister. So it places this meeting within that broader context of European leaders also being there, also engaged.
Exactly. It wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It shows this convergence of diplomatic activity around the funeral.
Okay, so that's the meeting itself. Productive, constructive, good, symbolic, potentially historic, depending on who you ask and what happens next.
Pretty much. But then things get perhaps a bit more complex when we look at what Trump said afterwards.
Ah, yes, the Truth Social post. This was just hours after meeting Zelensky.
That's right, hours later. And the focus, interestingly, shifted towards Putin.
What was the gist?
He basically expressed, well, some doubt about whether Putin actually wants to end the war.
Really? After saying he could end it quickly?
Well, he specifically mentioned the recent missile strikes hitting civilian areas in Ukraine as a reason for his skepticism. Like maybe that suggested Putin wasn't serious about stopping.
So almost like the meeting with Zelensky gave him a stronger dose of the reality on the ground.
It's possible, isn't it, that hearing directly from Zelensky influenced his perspective on Putin's current intentions.
And he used that phrase, tapping me along.
Yeah, he speculated Putin might be tapping me along, which kind of implies he thinks maybe Putin isn't negotiating in good faith or is just playing for time.
Which then led him to talk about other options.
Exactly. He said maybe a different approach was needed, and he mentioned using banking or secondary sanctions.
Okay, banking and secondary sanctions. That sounds like moving towards more economic pressure, perhaps.
That's what it suggests, doesn't it? A potential shift, or at least considering a shift, from pure negotiation to adding more financial squeeze on Russia.
But he still wants to broker a deal.
He did reiterate that, yeah. His goal is still to try and make a peace deal happen between Russia and Ukraine.
It's such a complex situation. You've got the full invasion in 2022, but also the conflict going back to 2014 in the East. Any deal has to navigate all that history.
Absolutely, it's not a simple starting point.
Now, you mentioned the Ukrainians wanted another meeting quickly. That same day.
Yes, reports suggested Zelensky's office was trying to arrange a follow-up for later that day. Seems they wanted to keep the momentum going.
But it didn't pan out.
No. Trump went straight from the funeral events to the airport for his flight back.
Why not? Was there any reason given?
The official line from Zelensky's spokesperson was just tight schedules.
Plausible, of course. These things are always packed.
Very plausible.
Yeah.
But you do wonder if the whole funeral setting, the time constraints, just made it too difficult logistically for another proper sit-down.
Could be. And the funeral context itself is so important here. We keep coming back to it. Over 50 heads of state and dignitaries there.
A major global gathering.
Yeah.
And Trump said he was attending out of respect for the Pope.
Which is interesting given their past disagreements, right?
Very interesting. We know they clashed quite publicly on things like immigration, building the wall, climate change.
I remember the Pope's comments about building walls not being very Christian, and Trump firing back, calling it disgraceful.
Exactly. So there was definite friction there during their respective times in office.
But his comments after the Pope's death were quite positive.
They were, yeah. He called him a good man, said he worked hard, loved the world, and he ordered flags at half-staff. So a measure of respect shown there.
Does that signal anything broader? Maybe about his view on global figures or institutions now?
Hard to say definitively. It could just be respecting the office and the occasion, or maybe a slight softening. We don't really know.
Now, about other meetings, Trump initially hinted he might have a lot of talks while in Rome.
He did suggest that early on, but then he seemed to walk it back a bit.
How so?
He mentioned later that having lots of in-depth meetings during the Pope's funeral might seem a little disrespectful.
Okay. Balancing diplomacy with the solemnity of it all.
Right, which makes sense. But he did also say he'd still be talking to people and seeing a lot of people.
Maybe more informally.
Possibly. He mentioned potentially using the U.S. ambassador's residence, which could be for more private or less formal chats.
Did he hint at who?
He said he was trying to see a couple of people that are important in what we're doing, and he tied that directly to his ceasefire efforts, and also, interestingly, to trade negotiations.
Oh, so mixing security and economic issues in these potential side talks.
It seems so, showing how these things often intertwine in international relations.
And didn't he post something else on Truth Social when he first arrived, before the Zelensky meeting?
Yes, good point. Upon arrival in Rome, he posted calling for very high-level talks between Ukraine and Russia.
Okay, pushing for negotiation.
But he also made quite a bold claim in that same post. He said his envoy, Steve Witkoff, had actually met with Putin the day before.
Met with Putin? Wow.
And according to Trump's post, both sides were apparently very close to a deal.
Very close to a deal. That sounds huge. Has that been confirmed anywhere else?
Not really, no. It's a significant claim, but it seems to have come just from Trump's side at this point.
What do you make of that? Putting that out there.
Well, even if it's more aspirational than factual at the moment, stating it publicly could be strategic. It maybe puts pressure on Kyiv and Moscow, or signals his own continued relevance, or maybe it's aimed at his supporters back home.
Reinforcing the deal-maker image.
Could be part of it.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Zelensky was definitely at the funeral with the First Lady. Putin, notably, was not.
Right. And there was also that brief interaction reported between Trump and Prince William.
Yes, just another example of the kind of encounters happening on the sidelines of such a major event.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. We have this significant, if brief, meeting, Trump and Zelensky.
Right, happening in this very unique, solemn setting of the Pope's funeral.
It gets described positively, constructive, good meeting. There's talk of a quick follow-up.
But that follow-up doesn't happen due to schedules or maybe the constraints of the event.
And then Trump, afterwards, expresses some public skepticism about Putin's readiness to actually end the war, mentioning things like secondary sanctions.
Which adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it? It tempers some of the optimism perhaps generated by the initial meeting report.
It really underscores this whole intricate dance of diplomacy,
Right.
where even these moments of global mourning become stages for critical talks.
And the fact it happened then just highlights how urgent everyone feels the Ukraine situation is, they're seizing any opportunity for discussion.
So for you listening, this is really important to track. In a war this devastating, how much weight do we give these high-level moments, the positive words versus the later doubts?
Yeah, these talks, even brief ones, could have real consequences down the line for global stability. It's worth paying close attention.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. Think about that setting again, a funeral, an event focused you'd imagine on peace, reconciliation, reflection.
Right.
How might that specific atmosphere have influenced the conversation between Trump and Zelenskyy, even subtly? Did it help? Did it hinder?
And what does it say about diplomacy today, that even these profoundly human moments of remembrance become venues for urgent geopolitical maneuvering? It's quite something to consider.